Israel has launched fresh airstrikes on Gaza. The ceasefire is on fragile ground. The violence is flaring up. This is Israel's second airstrike in 3 days. No casualties have been reported yet, but this escalation is testing the truce they reached last month after the 11-day war. So why is Israel bombing Gaza again? Well, it started with a series of provocations. The first one was this contentious march. Earlier this week, hundreds of Israeli ultra-nationalists turned out in East Jerusalem. They provoked the Palestinians. Why? Because this march was celebrating Israel's capture of East Jerusalem in 1967. Now, the Palestinians want East Jerusalem to be the capital of a future state of Palestine, a state that they believe should include the West Bank and Gaza. The Israeli ultra-nationalists gathered right here, and some of them were heard chanting, "Death to Arabs." This was a clear provocation for Palestinians. They launched their own counter-protests. On Tuesday, Palestinians took to the streets in West Bank. The Israeli army fired stun grenades to contain them. In Gaza, the Israeli flag was set on fire alongside a photograph of the new Israeli Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett. The Hamas has now come up with its own retaliation plans. They did not respond with rockets this time. Instead, they launched incendiary balloons. They set several fields in Israel on fire. Throughout this week, these balloons kept flowing in from Gaza to Israel. And on Tuesday, fields were burning in 13 areas in Israel. On Thursday, 8 more areas were set on fire.
We in the unit of the grandsons of Nasser continuing for the second day in launching incendiary balloons. Yesterday, we launched hundreds of incendiary balloons towards the Gaza border, which resulted in 26 fires, according to the recognition of the Hebrew media. Today, we will continue sending the arson balloons as long as the enemy continues its stupidities and doesn't withdraw its threats against our people in the occupied Jerusalem.
In response, Israel ordered airstrikes on Hamas. The Israeli army says it targeted military compounds and a rocket launching site. For now, it doesn't look like the situation will escalate, but the latest round of airstrikes underscores how fragile this truce is. And this is a new government that is dealing with all of this in Israel, dealing with the same old challenge. Its response to Hamas remains just as fierce. Just 3 days after he pushed Benjamin Netanyahu out of power, Naftali Bennett and his new government are facing their first test. Despite the mediation by Egypt and the United Nations, Israel and Hamas are yet to reach a deal for a lasting ceasefire agreement. Now, the Israeli military has issued a warning. They say that fighting will resume if they're provoked again. The Palestinians are not backing down. Today, during Friday prayers, Palestinian worshippers and protesters clashed with Israeli police on Jerusalem's Temple Mount. It began with a procession of several hundred people. Some of them refused to disperse when they arrived at the exit of the compound, and that's when they started hurling rocks at the police. Israeli cops responded with sponge-tipped bullets and stun grenades. Reports say at least 3 people have been wounded in this clash. On the World Wide Web, the Palestinians are fighting fashion retailer Zara. It is facing boycott calls because one of the designers got into an argument about Israel and Palestine online. And the result is this: Zara is facing boycott calls on the internet. Let me tell you how this began. Vanessa Perelman is a head designer at Zara. She got into an argument with a model called Kahir Harhash. And this was over his advocacy for the people of Gaza. Perelman lost her cool. She sent direct messages to the model, who later shared these messages with his followers. Allow me to read out some of these messages to you. And this is what it says. Maybe if your people were educated, then they wouldn't blow up the hospitals and schools that Israel helped to pay for in Gaza. The people in my industry know the truth about Israel and Palestine, and I will never stop defending Israel, and people like you come and go in the end. Israelis don't teach children to hate nor throw stones at soldiers as your people do. These are strong words. Zara has condemned them, but they've gone viral. And they've been shared thousands of times. And this has led to boycott calls. Hashtag boycott Zara is trending on social media. Critics say Vanessa Perelman should be fired for her comments. Why is this story important? What does it tell you? The Israel-Palestine equation is extremely volatile. One comment is enough to spark a fire. Imagine how much worse a fire balloon can do. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.